Hello, my name's Gavin. This is Genre Books, and it's December and week 4 of my Read What You Own Challenge updates. The Read What You Own Challenge is a Booktube event created by Criminoli as some kind of punishment to read books from your own shelves before you buy any new books. This can be any number of books, 5, 10, the recognised tiers 25, 50, 75 and the platinum grade of 100, which I am doing. There's also a page count alternative where each book is given a theoretical limit of 250 pages. So if you want to read 25,000 pages instead of 100 books, feel free. I'm not doing that because it's going to be quicker to get through some shorter books, and we have some examples of shorter books this week. And I'm going to start with I think the favourite book that I read in the past week, and that is John Steinbeck's The Moon is Down. I loved it. I love John Steinbeck. I can't think of a duff John Steinbeck that I have read, but I'd never got round to this one before, and yeah, there's a lot to like here. This is also a pure piece of war propaganda and was used as such. During the Second World War and for some time after, this was the most popular piece of American literature in the USSR because this book was translated and published underground everywhere. Very popular in France as well. It's propaganda in the best possible way. This book also had a direct influence on the war, I think. Operation Braddock and Operation Braddock 2 were operations carried out by the Special Operations Executive in Britain to airdrop materials into enemy-controlled towns and villages. Firearms, sort of very basic firearms, incendiary devices, just parachuted in, picked up by the locals and used against the Germans. Anyway, this is a great book. We read in a day and one added to the total. I also read 2 books this week from John Russell Fearn, and I'd have to find out maybe what the exact intended audience for these books are. I think the anticipated reader was maybe skewing on the younger side because they are very simplistic stories, still quite full of action and still with high enough body counts, certainly in the first one, but interesting. He has a very fertile imagination, John Russell Fearn, even if some of the ideas are just sort of thrown in there seemingly at the last minute. I'm going to start with The G-Bomb. Now, I think this was first published under the pseudonym of Vargo Staten, so it would have been sort of very mushroom press, pulpy material, and it does show. I'm not saying this is anywhere near a perfect book. Its characters are introduced and bumped off pretty quickly, and we realise our main character is someone completely different. And things happen very quickly. The villain is almost unredeemingly bad, and the resolution, the Deus Ex Machina, which saves our characters, is quite a left field turn, but also very helpfully something which falls into my Project Rabbit Hole, which I'll be really diving into next year. In reality, this book only touches upon themes from sort of Lost to Civilizations in the last sort of 10, 20 pages of the book, which is sort of indicative of how this book went. There were a few step changes of style, where we've gone from mad inventor, hard up case, to world domination, to natural disaster, to salvation, all very, very quickly. It's not amongst the best work I've read from John Russell Fearn, but even his not so great stuff is still very enjoyable. And I must have enjoyed it enough to read a second John Russell Fearn book this week, Miracle Man. I don't know under which name this was first printed or where this first came out. Again, I'm imagining this was directed to a younger readership. Some things are handled very simplistically, and some things just aren't explained at all. The villain is, again, fairly cardboard cutout. The love story that develops is possibly, given it's a science fiction work, the most unbelievable aspect of this book. It deals with a man, Esau Jones, who can manipulate matter in whichever way he wants, and chooses to do very little with it. But what he does choose to do is help people. And unfortunately, one of the people he ends up helping is the foremost scientist in the land, who presents him to like the equivalent of the Royal Society, and basically puts him on the spot and gets him to perform for them. The scientists end up getting themselves into trouble, and they then try to get Esau Jones to help dig them out of a quite literal hole. And he is reluctant to do so because he has been very badly treated by them. There's a fair amount of humour in this, but also it's the science as it stands is fantastical, but also a little bit more believable than the human interactions. It's a fun read. Thankfully, it's a brisk read because, again, this is not Fearn's best work. I think I much prefer the stuff he wrote for the Pulps. Those last two books do, however, count towards New World's November. I thought this one would count towards New World's November as well, and it does, but I did not anticipate that it would also count towards Dr. November. Ossian's Ride by Fred Hoyle is the third Fred Hoyle book I've read during November, but I think it's probably the weakest of the three. I think it's also the earliest of the three. And Fred Hoyle was not naturally a novelist. He was a scientist who wrote novels in his spare time. And this has a fair amount of espionage. Our main character, Thomas Sherwood, is a Cambridge undergraduate recruited to the British Special Services to infiltrate the dystopian police state that Ireland has become. Ireland has become this secretive and technologically dominant world power because of a company called ICE, which has basically taken over the southwestern tip of Ireland and is producing advanced technological and building materials at an unbelievable rate. And the story of infiltration is basically covers, I would say, it's 80% of this book. And that, I think, is its flaw. It's an enjoyable book, but the same thing keeps happening again and again. He is frustrated and betrayed at every turn, And unfortunately, that means that sort of by page 150, when he is betrayed for seemingly the upteenth time, that doesn't really hold much of a surprise. The big reveal at the end is a bit of a departure. Perhaps not so much given some of the other Fred Hoyle that I've read this month, but I feel it comes a little bit too late, and the reveal is a little bit flaccid. There are a few lazy stereotypes about the Irish in this book, and to be honest, when it's in Britain, there's a few about the Brits as well. It's not very deep on character. The dialogue is somewhat leaden. Some interesting ideas, but I think here we have, I would say, a guy who's still learning his craft, but this, I think, is, of the books I've read, this is like the second. He had written a book before this called The Black Cloud, which I read years ago and enjoyed a lot more. Maybe I'm a little more discerning, but given the rest of the stuff I've read this week, maybe not. I'm still interested to read Fred Hoyle, which is just as well because I have a second buddy read coming up with the Andromeda Breakthrough, and I have a copy of The Inferno, which I will get to as well in the next month or so, which was written by Fred Hoyle and in conjunction with his son Jeffrey. So I've still got some Hoyle to get through. I still have some more thoughts about Hoyle to share, but I've got to say this one was a bit of a disappointment. I don't want to end on a down note, so it's just as well I also managed to read again the third book by an author in the month of November, and this is John Kendrick Bangs and the Enchanted Typewriter, the third of his Hades novels, and the continuing comic adventures of the Stygian residents of the underworld, this time given the framing of their communication with our world through a frustrated humour writer and his enchanted typewriter. It reads very much that the main character is Bangs himself, and his typewriter seems to have a life of its own, but it turns out it's James Boswell. This is, again, a bit more anecdotal, rather like the first book in the series rather than the second, but it's no less fun for all of that. I won't say too much about this because I do have a fourth one of these to read, and then I want to talk about Bangs in general. I am glad I downloaded a lot of Bangs before the Read What You Earn challenge. I don't think I'd ever heard of him before I started looking at books from the underworld. And his associated Shades or Hades series came up in a couple of lists. So I downloaded from Gutenberg and I really enjoyed it. He's really funny, and I've got some of his other short stories to get through in December. 2 sets of short stories, both Christmas stories. And now we're in December, that is going to be obviously a feature. So expect some Christmas books coming up in the next few weeks, and hopefully continuing the pace at which I'm getting through the books for the Read What You Own challenge. For a high-tech visualization of the progress made, week 4 and 21 books, so over a fifth of the way there. That's still going to take some time to fill up the sheet, but happy with how it's going so far. My strategy of short books may be coming to a bit of a shuddering halt, though, with the introduction of this to my weekly reading. This is Thomas Pynchon's Against the Day, a group read organised by Greg at Another Bibliophile Reads and Alan from Big Hard Books and Classics. And is a fairly weighty tome to get through. 1,000 or so pages, but we're giving ourselves 2 months to do it. But until next time,